My name is Karen Rivera, 28 years old. I always thought of myself as the dependable one, the anchor of my family. I live in Chicago, work as a software programmer, and for years I believed my sacrifices kept us afloat. My parents, Linda and Robert, were never irresponsible exactly, but money slipped through their fingers like water. My younger brother, Zach, 2 years behind me, was the dreamer. Or at least that's the word my parents used. To me, he was the gambler, except he didn't play cards, he played with people's trust. By the time I was 16, I had already been working part-time jobs after school, bagging groceries, scrubbing floors in the stockroom, even selling sandwiches at the train station. My paychecks went straight into the household. Groceries, utilities, Zach's movie tickets, Mom's church donations, when she didn't want Dad to know. It became normal me paying them asking. I told myself it was temporary, but then college came. They swore they couldn't afford Zach's tuition, so I covered it. $40,000 siphoned out of scholarships and side hustles just to give him a degree he's never used. I still remember the night I wrote that last tuition check. Zach hugged me, promising he'd pay me back once his startup took off. He smelled like cheap cologne and optimism. I wanted to believe him. But last month, that illusion finally cracked. It was a Sunday dinner, the kind we'd had for years. The roast smelled comforting. The mashed potatoes were smooth. The green beans gleamed with butter. I thought we'd eat, argue lightly about politics, and I'd drive home tired but safe. Instead, Mom dropped a bomb over the mashed potatoes. Zach's third startup had failed. Worse, he owed serious money to his business partners, men who apparently wanted repayment in blood as much as dollars. "Karen, honey, we need your help," Mom said, gently spooning potatoes onto my plate, as if starch could soften the request. Zach looked down at his plate cheeks, pink the picture of shame. "I know I messed up, but these guys aren't joking around. They want $2,000 a month until it's paid off." Dad chimed in, voice steady but pleading. "You should help your brother get back on his feet. He just needs time to start another business." That was when I snapped. I slammed my hand on the table so hard the silverware jumped. "Are you kidding me? I warned you this would happen. That wasn't a real business. It was a pyramid scheme dressed up as software." "Karen, come on," Zach muttered, eyes darting everywhere but mine. "I just need some time to figure things out." "No." My voice broke like glass. "I'm done. I bailed you out twice already. 15,000 the first time, 8,000 the second. And now you want me to pour more into this black hole? No more. Figure it out yourself." Mom's eyes shimmered with tears. "But he's your brother. Families don't abandon each other." "He's got the same degree I do," I shot back. "He could get a job as a programmer, but he'd rather play king of some fantasy startup. Enough." I grabbed my purse and walked out, the scent of pot roast clinging to my coat like guilt. That was the last time I spoke to any of them. A month of silence followed. For the first time in years, I wasn't bleeding money for someone else's mistakes. I saved. I slept. I laughed with coworkers. I told myself maybe I had finally broken free. Then my phone rang yesterday. Mom's voice sugar sweet. "Karen, sweetheart, we miss you so much. Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? I'll make your favorite carrot cake. Your father wants to apologize." Dad took the phone, his tone soft but businesslike. "Hey, kiddo, bring your laptop, will you?" "Mine's been running slow. I need some programs reinstalled." Part of me wanted to hang up. Another part, lonely hopeful, wondered if maybe they meant it. Against my better judgment, I said yes. But this morning, everything changed. I was sipping coffee, scrolling through emails when I saw it, an unfamiliar address subject line in block letters, "Do not go to dinner tonight. Your life is in danger." I froze. My thumb hovered over delete. Probably spam, I thought. But my gut clenched. Against reason, I clicked. The body was short, clinical. "There is no way in the world you should come to your parents' dinner today. Listen to the attached audio file. Your family is planning something terrible." My pulse thundered in my ears. The attachment blinked at me. With trembling hands, I pressed play. The sound of my mother's coffee maker bubbling filled the room so familiar it made my stomach knot. Then Mom's voice calm, deliberate. "So we're all agreed. We need to get Karen's laptop so Zach can access her bank accounts." Zach's voice low and eager. "Perfect. But how do we get her away from it long enough for me to work?" And then Mom's laugh. "I'll make her favorite carrot cake. I'll add some peanut paste to the frosting. She's been allergic since she was a child. She'll have a reaction for sure." Silence, then Zach's chuckle. "Mom, that's brilliant." Dad's voice steady, almost bored. "I'll call 911 when it happens. That'll give you time." Zach again. While she is having her reaction, I'll transfer 2,000 to my account. Then I'll download all her passwords and install spyware. Small amounts after that 2,000 a month. She'll never notice. They laughed. My parents, my brother, laughing about my death like it was logistics. The recording ended. I sat paralyzed, my coffee growing cold, staring at the screen. My family, my blood was plotting to kill me. Rage followed. Years of sacrifice, groceries, tuition loans, suddenly twisted into betrayal. My love had been their ladder, and now they wanted to kick it away. But underneath the fury was something else: suspicion. The recording was crystal clear, too perfect. Who had placed that microphone? Who had sent it to me? The email's signature line contained nothing except for a detail that made my stomach lurch. The subject line ended with a timestamp 06:17. That was the exact time the old grandfather clock in my parents' hallway chimed every morning when Dad made coffee. Someone had been there. I spent the day preparing. As a programmer, it was child's play to install monitoring software on my laptop. Silent surveillance tracking every keystroke, recording audio and video the moment the screen flickered awake. I rehearsed the timing, even practiced collapsing on the couch. Then I stood in my bathroom holding the small emergency spray that had saved me twice before. The label was worn, but the promise was still good. A few precious minutes of breath. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. At 6 sharp, I would walk into their house, smile, eat, pretend, and wait for them to try. I whispered to my reflection, "Let's see what you'll do when I stop being your victim." I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 6. The porch light pulled warm against the evening chill, and for a second the ordinary scene tricked me. Wreath on the door, Dad's truck in the driveway, the scent of butter and cinnamon drifting through the screen. Mom opened the door with that practiced wide smile she reserves for company and funerals. "Karen." "Oh, sweetheart, come in." She pulled me into a hug so tight I could feel the bones of her back. The hug tasted like betrayal and starch. Dad stood in the living room with arms wide. "There's our girl." He squeezed me like he was testing I was real. Zach emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Cheeks flushed, as if he'd been sweating with the effort of playing normal. "Hey, sis," he said. And for a heartbeat, I heard a note in his voice that almost sounded like remorse. Almost. They'd laid the table like nothing had happened. Linen napkins, my grandmother's chipped china, a bouquet with just browned roses. Mom's roast steamed in the center of the table. The carrot cake was wrapped on a separate plate, a 3-layered thing of icing and memory I'd never once suspected could be turned into a weapon. We ate like strangers at a family's dinner. Small talk. Anecdotal laughter. The safe trivia of people who know each other's histories better than their motives. "How's work?" Zach asked at one point. Fingers drumming the table. His eyes flashed when I mentioned the software update I'd just finished, and I knew he was keeping a mental note of my free time, my login habits, the way I plugged into my laptop. I kept my composure by counting. Inhale, 3, exhale, 5, practicing the rhythm of someone tired from allergies, not someone about to test the limits of a life-saving spray. Every detail mattered. The hidden camera on the bookshelf, the malware that would silently email me a recording the moment a USB was connected, the software that would flag any transaction initiated from my accounts. I set these up the night before a spiderweb of surveillance I'd learned to weave in long years of fixing other people's careless networks. Mom kept hovering, piling mashed potatoes onto my plate, pressing more food like balm. "You're too skinny, honey." Her voice was syrup. I felt my throat close, and for a second, panic fluttered in my ribs. This was dangerous, not just a performance. I brushed the feeling down and reached for my water glass, pretending to sip while I loaded the next stage of acting in my mind. "Dessert," Mom said after dinner, clapping her hands like she'd lit a signal. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with the carrot cake. It was a forgery of all the cakes she'd ever baked for my birthdays, 3 soft layers, cream cheese. Frosting a decorative carrot of marzipan on top. "I made your favorite," she said, and the smile was so sincere it made my skin crawl. She cut me the biggest slice. Her hand lingered a second too long, like an accomplice savoring the picture she'd helped paint. I picked at the frosting, tiny finger motions while the family chatter lulled. The first forkful was sweet. The second hit my tongue and something metallic rose in my mouth, peanuts. My throat tightened like a noose. The world narrowed to a single pinpoint of panic, underlaid with anger so hot it blurred the edges of vision. "Oh God," I breathed. My voice was small, but meant every syllable calibrated. I clutched my throat, letting my fingers play at the exact spots I knew would make the act convincing thumb, pressing the space between collarbones, fingers skittering for breath. My heart pounded with real adrenaline and a dim, useful terror. "Call 911, I wheezed. The words came out clipped. Mom's face split open into the pantomime of horror I'd heard on the recording. Dad lurched to his feet, knocking his chair back. Their movements were predictably urgent, almost synchronized. Zach's face did something else, a twitch of impatience before he moved. I slid to the couch, positioning myself so my back faced the coffee table and the laptop bag sat conspicuously within arm's reach. I was careful not to look at them to keep the illusions whole. They moved toward this kitchen phone and the bag like actors on cues. I coughed, fingers clamped to my throat. The panic was nearly real now. My chest felt tight, the room warping at the edges, but I timed it, controlled it, because I had to. When Dad called the emergency line, his voice was a practiced cadence. When Mom hovered and dabbed a napkin, her eyes kept flicking to the coffee table, to that small, unassuming bag where my whole life, my passwords, accounts, safety was stored. I let them think the act had worked. A paramedic's wail in my head grew louder, as if already approaching. I blurred the edges of my vision in the lived sense of panic, and then when they clustered and leaned toward the laptop, I slid my hand into my jacket and thumbed the tiny emergency spray. A quick practice puff into my mouth, no scene, no flourish, and the epinephrine burned cold and then warm life, resuming its ordinary rhythm. My breathing steadied. I swallowed and kept my hand pressed to my throat, making enough of a show to sell their panic, but not enough to invite too much scrutiny. It worked. Zach moved too fast over to the laptop, fingers flying. I could hear him whisper a low rush of triumph over my performance. "Got it," he hissed to Mom. I'm into her banking. The muffled clack of keys, the clatter of a USB being pushed in. My hidden software pinged my phone's screenshots, timestamps, keystroke logs streaming in like a courtroom exhibit. I could feel the slow, hot pulse of vindication run beneath the terror. Then, as planned, the sirens that had been a private fantasy in my head became real. Someone at the end of the street had heard a car crash, or someone always set the neighbor's alarm off on Tuesdays. Whatever it was, the real sound cut clean through the room. Dad's head snapped up. Mom's eyes darted to me. "Is she okay?" she mouthed, voice trembling. But her hands were trembling toward the laptop. 2000 transferred. Now I heard through my phone's live feed. The words had the thrum of triumph. Zach's whisper was almost giddy. He yanked the USB free and closed the laptop as if he'd finished a task. "Done," he breathed. That was easier than I thought. Paramedics arrived in a flurry. 2 men in Navy uniforms, a stretcher practiced efficiency. "She's over here," Dad said, his voice pitched for urgency. One paramedic knelt beside me, and the other checked vitals. "Ma'am, can you hear me? What did you eat?" "Cake," I managed. "Peanuts." My voice was steady. The acting had become freighted with the real knowledge of what could have happened. They gave me a shot of epinephrine and strapped me onto a stretcher. As they wheeled me out, my chest still full of adrenaline and a thread of dangerous satisfaction, I looked back at my family in the doorway. Mom's tears were wet and loud. Dad's face was carved into worry. Zach stood with my laptop bag clutched in his hand, empty triumph flickering like a torch across his features. When they closed the ambulance doors, I felt the world shift. The surveillance software began stitching together evidence video of Zach's hands at the keyboard audio of their laughter logs of the transaction. I lay back on the stretcher, the sound of the siren, a high hymn, and thought of how fragile a single night can be. I'd survived their betrayal. Now I just had to make sure the rest of the world survived, knowing what they'd tried to do. The siren's wail blurred into the rush of city lights as the ambulance tore down Halstead. My lungs burned, but not from the allergy anymore, from the sheer adrenaline of having pulled it off. The paramedic with the square jaw, his name tag said, "Martinez," hovered with an oxygen mask. "You need the ER," he insisted. "No hospital," I rasped. My throat was scratchy, but my breathing was clear. I pulled the emergency spray from my pocket and held it up like a talisman. "I use this. I'm fine. I need the police." The younger paramedic, Johnson, frowned. Ma'am, you nearly went into anaphylaxis. We can't just listen. I cut him off with a sharpness I didn't recognize in my own voice. My parents and my brother just tried to poison me. They were in my house, stealing from my laptop while I collapsed on their couch. I have proof. Take me to the Brighton Park police station. Now. The two men exchanged a look. Martinez hesitated, then muttered, Jesus Christ. A moment later, the ambulance swerved, sirens still blaring, but the route was different. I knew the station was 20 minutes away. I leaned back against the stretcher, gripping my phone, where the monitoring software continued to feed me evidence in real time. Zach's keystrokes, the $2,000 withdrawal, even the USB insertion. A digital lifeline. When the ambulance doors finally opened, the chill slapped me awake. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights hummed. A desk sergeant with a lined face and skeptical eyes listened as I stumbled through my story. Her brows knitted tighter with every sentence. Wait here, she said finally, and disappeared. 5 minutes later, a woman in plain clothes walked out, her presence sharp as glass. Mid-40s, cropped black hair, eyes like steel wires. Ms. Rivera. I'm Detective Sarah Chen. Let's talk. In her office, she gestured for me to sit. I felt absurd, still strapped to the stretcher, until the paramedics unbuckled me with a reluctant sigh. My hands shook as I slid my phone across the desk. Start with this, I said. Detective Chen put on earbuds, hit play. I watched her face as my mother's voice filled the room. We need to get Karen's laptop. Zach's eager reply. My father's calm calculation. Then the casual cruelty of carrot cake and peanut paste. The recording ended, leaving silence that buzzed against the fluorescent lights. Chen finally removed the earbuds. This is damning. And you're saying you received this anonymously? Yes, this morning. I tapped the email still open on my screen. From an untraceable address. The file was too clean, too sharp. It had to be recorded inside their kitchen. But I don't know by who. And you still went to dinner. I swallowed. I had to catch them in the act. So I set up surveillance software. Look. I showed her the log screenshots of Zach's login attempts, the money transfer, the spyware installation. A timestamp matched the exact minutes I'd been choking on cake in their living room. Chen leaned forward, scrolling through the entries, her jaw tightening. You installed this in advance, she asked. After I got the email, yes. She exhaled slowly. That was incredibly dangerous. You could have died. I knew the risks, but they would have kept draining me. This way, I have proof. Chen nodded, her expression unreadable. We'll need a warrant to seize your laptop. Where is it? At their house. My brother has it now. She stood already, pulling out her phone. We'll move tonight. The hours blurred. I sat in an interview room, scrawling my statement on legal pads, my hand cramping by the third page. Every detail mattered, the years of support, the escalating debts, the last month of silence, the phone call, with carrot cake as bait. Writing it all down felt like carving a gravestone for my family. Near midnight, Chen returned. We've secured a warrant. Officers are at your parents' house now. She paused, her gaze softening by a degree. Do you want to see them once they're brought in? The question hit like a punch. My heart screamed, no. My anger whispered, yes. Yes, I said. An hour later, I was led down a corridor into a holding area. The air smelled faintly of bleach and old paper. Behind a partition of reinforced glass, 3 familiar figures sat on metal benches. Mom's eyes were red, her hair flattened against her scalp like she'd been crying for hours. Dad's shoulders were square, but sagging at the edges. Zach's face, oh God, his face was a mask of confusion and resentment, as if none of this made sense to him. When they saw me, Mom shot to her feet, pressing her palms against the glass. Karen, thank God you're here. Tell them this is all a mistake. Please, honey. Her voice cracked, and for a second I almost believed her. Almost. Dad rose slowly. Kiddo, what's going on? Why are you doing this to us? His voice was calm, practiced, but his eyes darted. Zach stayed seated, staring at me with narrowed eyes. Finally, he spoke. It was just a joke, Karen. I wasn't really going to steal your money. You know me. The words detonated in my chest. A joke. Watching me choke. Installing spyware, that wasn't humor. It was survival at my expense. I leaned close to the glass, voice steady. You installed spyware so you could siphon money every month. That's not a prank. That's calculated theft. Zach flinched. His lips parted, then shut again. For once, he had no comeback. Mom slammed her palms against the glass. We were desperate. He owed people, Karen. Dangerous people. They said they'd hurt him if he didn't pay. What were we supposed to do? Her words chilled me. So it wasn't just greed, it was fear. But fear doesn't excuse slipping poison into a daughter's cake. You were supposed to protect me, I whispered, not serve me up. The silence between us was louder than any siren. Detective Chen touched my shoulder, gently steering me back. That's enough for tonight. As I walked out, I glanced once more through the glass. My family sat in a row of shame, my mother sobbing, my father stiff, my brother hollow-eyed. 3 shadows of the people I'd once loved. But as Chen guided me toward the door, one detail gnawed at me. In Zach's muttered defense, he'd slipped. They said they'd hurt him. Not business partners, not investors. Something else, something darker. The puzzle pieces shifted again. Someone out there had recorded my family's conspiracy. Someone had sent me that email at 6:17. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't only about family betrayal. Courtrooms have a way of turning feeling into measures, counts, statutes, years, fines. The sterile light of the courthouse seemed to scrub the color out of everything. I sat in the gallery, with my hands folded, the paper of my statement creasing under my fingers, while the prosecutor laid out the case like a craftsman assembling a model. Attempted poisoning, theft, computer fraud, conspiracies to commit bodily harm. Each charge had a number, a legal heft, and the judge listened with the bored intensity of someone who'd seen too many family dramas unravel. The prosecution's case was meticulous. They played the kitchen recording in open court, soulless and clear. The audio filled the room. Mom's casual cruelty, Zach's eager whisper, Dad's calm. They brought in forensic accountants who traced the $2,000 transfer to Zach's account, and cyber specialists who demonstrated the spyware's presence and its capability to siphon passwords. My surveillance log screenshots of keystrokes, timestamps, the USB insertion were entered as exhibits. Each click I had captured was another link in the chain. The defense tried to cloud the picture with explanations and pleading tones. Mom's attorney painted a portrait of desperation, people pushed to the edge. Zach's lawyer called his client a remorseful young man who had made a terrible mistake under pressure. They tried to reframe the transfer as a foolish lapse in judgment, not premeditated harm. But the recording was indisputable. They'd talked about peanut paste, about calling 911. The jurors watched their faces, and the judge folded his hands and seemed to decide in the slow way judges do. Sitting in that room, the relief I felt was tangled with a new, heavier grief. There's a difference between justice and comfort. Watching your family led away in handcuffs is not redemption, it's an excision. I listened as witnesses testified, neighbors who'd heard raised voices, a cashier who'd seen Zach nervously paying for items with cash, the paramedics who had examined me that night. Detective Chen testified in a way that was quietly rigorous. She showed the chain of custody for the laptop evidence, the code the malware used. The bank trails. I watched her look at me once from the witness stand, a tiny nod of recognition that felt like the only human warmth in the room. When the verdicts came, they were clinical and final. Zach was sentenced to 2 years in prison for fraud, unauthorized access, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm. The judge cited the recorded plan and the transfer as aggravating factors. My parents were spared prison time, probation, and fines instead, but the judge made it clear their role was criminal and morally reprehensible. They were ordered to pay restitution, and each received a substantial fine, more money than they'd ever had in the account I'd been propping up for years. Sitting outside the courtroom after the sentencing, the city noise crashing around me, I felt lighter and lonelier at the same time. The legal system had done a thing. It had recognized the crime and handed down consequences. It could not, however, stitch back the years of small betrayals that had become habit. The calls stopped. Then the letters did. My parents moved out of our old neighborhood and quietly sold the house. Word spread, and neighbors who once waved now averted their gazes. The shame became a visible thing they had to carry. I heard later they'd packed as quickly as they could, and 6 months after the verdict boarded a bus for Arizona. People in the community whispered of fines and debts and a family flattened by scandal. I tried to build a life in the wreckage. Work was a refuge. For once, I poured energy into code that benefited other people, rather than patching my family's financial leaks. The promotion came unexpectedly 6 months later. Senior software engineer, a raise that felt like a small, private vindication. I celebrated alone in my apartment with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine I'd carefully rationed the way I'd rationed hope for years. I allowed myself to feel something that wasn't apathy or fury, cautious pride. I'd rebuilt the walls around myself brick by brick. But consequences ripple. At the office, coworkers who had once been friendly nodded at me with polite distance. In hallway conversations, names and the case floated like clouds you avoid walking through. A teammate who used to share lunch now sent calendar invites for project syncs instead of invitations to dinner. Trust once eroded stains every interaction. I found myself checking the way people type the cadence of messages as if the world might split open and reveal motives at any time. The nights were the worst. In the dark, my brain would replay the cake, the laugh, the way my mother's hand had lingered over the frosting. I had dreams where I choked not on peanuts, but on words I never said, confessions, apologies, everything that could never fix what had been done. I learned to sleep with the blinds open, the streetlight on, because darkness felt like collusion. Therapy helped some. A steady therapist with a quiet voice taught me how to anchor myself in the moment when the past pressed. The guilt, bizarrely, was not only mine. Sometimes I caught myself missing the versions of my parents before the betrayal. The woman who used to braid my hair, the man who taught me to ride a bike. Human beings are full of contradictions. The people who betray us often once comforted us. From time to time, Zach called. The calls were short and awkward. Their tones soaked in that peculiar prison of apology where words feel both insufficient and manufactured. "Sis," he would say, voice breaking in sporadic bursts. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." And then the line would go quiet. I stopped answering. Forgiveness isn't a simple switch. Neither is contact. Sometimes cutting a cord is an act of preservation rather than cruelty. Detective Chen kept a professional distance but stayed in touch enough to close the practical loops. She told me about the forensic trail that led partly to my brother's debts loan sharks threatening messages men with cold eyes who had shadowed his missteps. There were things she still couldn't fully disclose. A line of code on one of the files suggested post-transfer tampering, something that hinted at an outside hand who might have been manipulating more than my family's greed. She promised to keep digging on the anonymous email, but the trail was thin and encrypted. Whoever had recorded my family's kitchen had covered their tracks masterfully. Then, on a damp December morning, 6 months after the trial, a plain envelope arrived with no return address. I didn't think it would be anything, mostly junk requests for donations, a magazine subscription renewal. But inside was a simple note on white paper, typed and precise. "I hope you're doing well. You deserve to know the truth. A friend." There was no signature, no clue. It felt like a benediction and a tease, equal parts kindness and mystery. I folded the note and put it in my wallet alongside the receipts and the little emergency spray I'd learned to keep close. The card didn't solve anything. It didn't arrest an identity or hand me the gratitude I wanted to give. It simply reiterated a fact I'd been living into. Someone had tipped the scale. Someone had chosen to interrupt a family's slide into crime by whispering truth into my inbox. Life went on in small, stubborn ways. I learned to relish quiet mornings with coffee that no one else asked for a share of to save without sending to close my laptop at 9, and not worry about whether the door was locked or if the people who'd once called me home had the key. I met my promotion with practical joy and set aside a portion of my raise into an account labeled Future. The city hummed. I walked down streets that had once felt claustrophobic with family obligation and now felt expansive with possibility. Evenings sometimes brought a pang of loneliness, an ache shaped like chairs at a table, or a flash of gratitude for the decision I'd made to stay and fight. Justice had been done imperfect and blunt. The world had not been made wholly right, but I was still here breathing, making choices that were mine alone. You can survive a betrayal and still feel its cold. You can accept the comfort of a new life and still want answers about the hand that saved you. I kept the little typed note in my wallet. I read it sometimes when the nights felt thin and I wondered about the person who'd risked everything to send it. Whoever they were, they'd altered the course of my life, saved it perhaps. That knowledge was a small, complicated mercy I wasn't yet ready to unpack. 6 months of silence had turned into a strange kind of rhythm. I woke without expecting phone calls begging for money. I cooked for one savored leftovers without anyone scraping the pan. My bank balance grew in steady increments instead of hemorrhaging with emergencies. Life was stable, but never still under the surface questions bubbled. Who had sent that anonymous email? Who had been close enough to my parents' kitchen to record the bubbling coffee pot, the low timbre of my father's voice, the scrape of Zach's chair, the card in my wallet? You deserve to know the truth, a friend. Felt like a ghost's fingerprint. Detective Chen hadn't closed the file completely. She invited me back to the precinct one gray February afternoon, spreading manila folders across her desk like a dealer with a rigged deck. We ran down possible sources, she said. Neighbors, ex-partners, old business associates. 3 names keep popping up. The first was Tyler Marks, one of Zach's burned investors who'd lost 10 grand on the first startup. Tyler had a temper a record for trespassing. The second, Maya Lopez, was an ex-girlfriend who'd once posted cryptic rants online about Zach's parasite family. The third was a neighbor, Mr. Halverson, who'd complained about my parents' late-night arguments and might have heard more than he admitted. I stared at the files, each possibility a silhouette that could fit. But the question was, did they want to help me or simply hurt my family in a way that left me as collateral protection? Chen tapped a finger on Tyler's file. He had access. He'd been in the house once left angry. He has the skills worked in audio equipment before investing. But we can't prove he was there. What about Maya? I asked. Chen shrugged. She had motive. Her last social media post was a rant about Zach stealing her rent money. But she's been clean since no indication she stalked them. I left the station that day with my coat pulled tight, the wind sharp as accusation. Each suspect was plausible, but none felt certain. The truth was like smoke curling away every time I tried to close my hand. One night, Zach called from prison. I shouldn't have answered, but curiosity wore me down. His voice was raw, stripped of bravado. Lena, please, you have to believe me. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Not supposed to go that far. My voice snapped like ice. You talked about peanuts. You laughed while I choked. He was silent for a moment, then, they were threatening me. People I owed. If I didn't pay, they said they'd make an example out of me. Mom and Dad, they panicked. We all did. It wasn't greed, it was fear. I wanted to believe him. Fear explains a lot, but it doesn't excuse slipping poison into a sister's cake. Then why keep stealing monthly, I asked. He faltered. I didn't think you'd notice. $2,000 a month, you make more than that. Stop! I cut him off. The same justification, the same manipulation. Fear had warped into entitlement long ago. When I hung up, my chest ached. Zach's words rattled in my skull. If what he said was true, then someone else out there held the knife to his throat. Someone had forced his hand and maybe, just maybe, had also tipped me off to save me. Weeks later, the mystery tilted again. It was a Friday evening when an anonymous message hit my inbox. No subject, no name. Just a sentence. Meet me tomorrow at Cafe Indigo, 3 p.m. Sit by the window. My heart jolted. I stared at the words until they blurred. Cafe Indigo was 3 blocks from my office, a place I'd gone once with coworkers for lattes. Whoever sent this knew where I worked, knew my routines. I forwarded it to Chen. She called me within minutes. This could be a trap, she warned. Let us set up surveillance. But something inside me, maybe recklessness, maybe longing, pushed me to agree. I'll go. I told her. I need answers. The next afternoon, I sat at the cafe's window table, the hum of espresso machines around me, steam fogging the glass. My heart thudded against my ribs like it wanted out. I clutched the coffee cup to disguise the trembling in my hands. At 3:05, the bell above the door chimed. A figure entered. Hood pulled up, scanning the room. My pulse leapt into my throat. Was this the friend or another kind of danger? The stranger moved toward me, every step deliberate. The hooded figure paused by my table. My palms slicked with sweat around the porcelain cup, and for a second I thought about bolting, leaving questions unanswered forever. Then the stranger pulled the hood back. It wasn't Tyler the investor, or Maya the ex-girlfriend, or even Mr. Halverson the neighbor. It was a woman I didn't recognize, late 30s, hair cut short, eyes tired, but sharp. She slid into the seat across from me without asking. Karen, she said softly, I'm the one who sent the email. The cafe clatter dulled to a hush in my ears. Who are you? She glanced around, then leaned forward. Name doesn't matter. Let's just say I knew your brother once. I invested in one of his so-called startups. He scammed me, like he scammed dozens of others, but I saw something he didn't: your family's willingness to protect him at any cost. I swallowed hard. So you recorded them? She nodded. I lived close by for a while. I'd hear things through the thin walls, arguments, whispers. That night in the kitchen, I set up a recorder I'd hidden before. I didn't do it for you, not at first. I wanted leverage against Zach, but when I heard what they planned with the cake, her voice faltered. I couldn't just sit on it. I knew you had no idea, so I sent it. Her gaze met mine steady without apology. You deserved to know. You deserved a chance to survive. My breath shuddered out of me. Why stay anonymous? Why send the card later? A faint smile. Because if Zach knew it was me, he wouldn't stop looking. He owes people ugly people. I didn't want them at my door, but I wanted you to live. It should have been relief. Instead, it was a knot of gratitude and unease. She hadn't saved me out of love. She'd saved me out of vengeance and necessity. But sometimes mercy is tangled, messy, and pure. It still counts. Before I could ask more, she stood. That's all you need. Don't try to find me again. She slid a small envelope across the table and walked out, disappearing into the afternoon. Inside the envelope was a flash drive. At home, I plugged it in with shaking fingers. Dozens of audio files, bloomed conversations, arguments. My brother promising impossible profits, my parents excusing him, whispering about debts and collectors. Proof not just of one betrayal, but a history of enabling. I handed the drive to Detective Chen the next day. She listened, jaw tightening. This confirms what we suspected. Zach's debts weren't just to business partners. They were to loan sharks. Dangerous people. She glanced at me. You were never their first priority. Paying them off was. The words landed like a dull weight. I wasn't a daughter or a sister to them anymore. I was collateral. Months later, the trial dust settled. Zach served his time. My parents struggled under fines and shame, and I built my life in quiet increments. I stopped answering their calls. I stopped replaying the courtroom in my head. On my 29th birthday, I walked into a bakery and bought myself a slice of carrot cake. I set it on my table, the frosting white and innocent, no poison laced beneath. I lit a single candle and whispered, "For me." The first bite was sweet, not bitter. Detective Chen checked in occasionally. Any more notes, she asked once. I shook my head. The mysterious woman had vanished, her promise kept. The flash drive had been her final gift. Some nights I still wonder about her, where she is, whether she feels safer now. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks of me at all. But maybe that doesn't matter. Not every guardian wears wings. Some slip a recording into your inbox and then vanish. What matters is this: I am alive. I am free. And I know now that love without loyalty is just a knife waiting to fall. I keep the Christmas card in my desk drawer. On quiet nights, I read it again. You deserve to know the truth. A friend. It reminds me that survival often comes from unlikely places, that even in betrayal, small mercies can change everything.